This is a case that left even a seasoned judge stunned. Alabama chiropractor Brian Mann has been sentenced to life in prison for attempting to murder his wife by poisoning her with lead, disguised as daily supplements. The evidence was chilling, but what truly shocked the courtroom was Mann's disturbing behavior during trial. And what the judge said at sentencing, you won't believe it. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Life in prison. That is the sentence. That is the fate for the former Alabama chiropractor Brian Mann, who was convicted back in June of attempted murder of his wife, Hannah Mann. He tried to poison her with lead. Back in January of 2022, when she was admitted to the hospital with abdominal pain, the staff concluded she had ingested a lot of lead over an extended period of time. This was no accident. And while she was recovering in the hospital for months, it turns out Brian was the one who put her there. Supposedly, he had been giving her daily supplements that were laced with something that can be quite deadly, and apparently they were going through a divorce. In fact, at trial, Dr. Felicia Hadaway, who treated Hannah, testified that safe levels of lead in someone's body would be around the number 10. Hannah tested in the 80s. Hartselle Police Chief Alan McDermott said, quote, "She had been there for a few days prior to them contacting us. The Department of Human Resources immediately told us that Brian was a suspect. I don't want to walk into a case with just tunnel vision, so we talked with everyone involved, and Brian was always on the forefront." And the chief indicated that while Brian initially was helping with the investigation, he soon lawyered up, would only have his attorney speak for him with police. Quote, "To me, that's a pretty red flag when we're trying to figure out what's wrong with your wife and you're not giving us all the information you can to help us." The lead that was in her colon was very pronounced. It is something you can say tangibly is there. It shows 100% that this stuff was ingested, that it was in her body. It looked like glitter on the x-ray. And referencing the supplements and the vitamins that Hannah took, the chief, who was shocked, by the way, said he stood there while she took them. So all that together just points more and more towards him. By the way, a contractor apparently tipped off police that he believed Mann got the lead during a construction project that was being performed at Mann's office. They were fortifying the x-ray rooms with lead, and apparently he left this extra remaining lead with Mann. So, you know what was also a big piece of evidence, by the way? The fact that there wasn't lead in the house, that it wasn't in the system of their kids. So again, we're not talking about accidental exposure or something that everybody was being poisoned with. It was argued, and this is an important point too, that Brian, in order to cast off suspicion, tried to poison himself. Get this, he goes to the Decatur Morgan Hospital saying, "Hey, I did an x-ray on myself at my clinic and I saw something in my stomach." Problem is, prosecutors said, when looking at the x-rays, it was determined that the lead in his system had only been ingested a few hours before. Oh, and for a first scan for him, when he was told that he would need a second scan, a nurse reportedly said that Brian became very nervous, thought he may leave. Yeah, that's not great. And by the way, what was also interesting about Dr. Hadaway's testimony was that they reportedly performed a 24/7 irrigation of Hannah's colon, and that is when they knew a crime had been committed. Hannah was in such bad condition that they actually had to temporarily paralyze her because any slight movement could have dangerously tipped off the pressure to her brain. Again, further indicating that this amount of lead in her body could only have been ingested. Oh, and it sure didn't help that Brian apparently took out life insurance policies on his wife worth over $1 million, including just days before Hannah was rushed to the hospital. You know what we call that? We call that financial motive. And when we talk about how egregious this is, how vicious, how strange, do you know what happened at sentencing? The judge, Charles Elliott, was so bothered by Mann apparently snickering during closing arguments and the facts of this case that when he sentenced Mann to life in prison with the possibility of parole, he told the prosecutor to let him know if Mann actually comes up for parole because he wants to be there to testify against him. The judge said this, "I've seen a lot in the 6.5 years I've been a circuit judge, and I saw a lot when I was a prosecutor with the DA's office. I've sat through and participated in hundreds of trials over the last 6.5 years, and I have never seen a defendant snickering during the state's closing arguments until you. I've never even heard of anything like that." He continued by saying, "Your wife's condition continued to deteriorate, and yet you continued to push her to take out more and more life insurance policies on herself. And then you have the gall to berate her when she doesn't like wearing ankle weights to defraud an insurance company. The testimony from your wife's medical providers was jarring to say the least." And here's the big statement. I want to ask the DA's office to personally notify me for whenever Mr. Mann comes up for parole. So in the event that 30 years from now, if I'm not in this position anymore, I will drive to Montgomery myself to speak against it. Wow. Wow. I've never heard that before. Okay? Now, according to 48 WAFF, lead prosecutor Garrick Vickery said regarding the judge's comments, quote, I believe this was a good glimpse into Brian Mann's character. I don't know if he took this seriously or if he takes anything seriously outside of himself and his pursuit of money. It's a peek into his soul. I believe, and Judge Elliott saw that and sentenced him appropriately. We will be in separate vehicles, but we will be in Montgomery to protest parole right alongside Judge Elliott. Hey, real quick, I want to give a shout out to Morgan & Morgan for sponsoring today's Law and Crime YouTube takeover. Now, Morgan & Morgan is a firm with over 1,000 attorneys. You know why they're so big? You know why they have so many? Because they win a lot. They have recovered over $25 billion from more than 500,000 clients. Think about that. In the past few months, a client in Florida received $12 million after the insurance company offered just $350,000. Out in Pennsylvania, a client was awarded $26 million. That is 40 times the insurer's $650,000 offer. Another client in Pennsylvania received $29 million after being offered only $500,000. And even if you think your case isn't worth millions of dollars, why not just start a claim and fight for what you deserve? Morgan & Morgan makes it so simple. You can start a claim from your phone in just 8 clicks. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/YouTube takeover by clicking the link below or scanning the QR code on screen. So let me bring in right now victims' rights attorney John Phillips. John, thanks so much for coming on. It seems to me when we talk about this sentence, it was probably a foregone conclusion he was getting life in prison. I looked a little bit at Alabama law for attempted murder. I think it could have been 10 to 99 years. I know it was reported that the defense didn't really have much to say. Maybe they were asking for mercy at one point. Mann didn't say anything reportedly during sentencing. But to have a judge make a comment like that, I want to be at his parole so I can testify against him, it seemed like life in prison for this crime was what was going to happen.
It did. You know, and prosecutors and investigators did a good job laying out, you know, not only the crime, but the motivation. And I feel like we're in an era where we just keep seeing, you know, spouses that can't go through a simple divorce that are plotting each other's murders. And it's a very disturbing trend. And this is a very disturbing case.
Yeah, and I'm not sure under Alabama law when parole could come up. I think it's based on a variety of factors. It might be different in every case. But what could Mann ever say or do to actually make parole? Because one of the things that the prosecutors really highlighted was this is not a one-time thing, that he was doing this daily. Day in, day out. His wife was getting sicker. He was not taken to the hospital. How can anybody like that ever be allowed to be free?
Exactly. Like it's the way that it was described is it was almost a daily premeditation, you know, like day upon day upon day upon day, you know, not just the one we think about where somebody draws up a map of how they're going to kill somebody. This is, you know, without mercy too, you know, seeing your wife, you know, suffer, and lead poisoning as we know is just one of those things that people talk about that's just so, you know, such a horrible way to go. So.
And thankfully she was saved, although she's got a long road to recovery through this. Right. John, were you surprised by the verdict in this case? Because according to the Hartzell Inquirer, Mann's defense argued that the evidence in this case was collected improperly. You know, according to this local newspaper, Mann's defense pushed back on how evidence was collected in the case, and they tried to block it from coming into trial. There was a claim that police had actually extracted lead from Hannah's urine in the parking lot of the police station using a bucket. This is according to WAAY. You had Mann's defense attorney, Chad Morgan, say, I didn't think that they proved that there was an overt act on his part by any means, anywhere, by any kind of evidence. So were you surprised by the verdict?
Yeah, there was a lot of pretrial stuff that happened I wasn't surprised by the verdict, you know, kind of how we got there. The thing to know about this part of Alabama is it's very small. You know, everybody kind of knows everybody. I had some fraternity brothers at Alabama from Hartzell in that area. and probably went to law school with some of the lawyers involved in the case, or at least their cousins. But it's a very small area. And, when you deal with justice in small town, particularly in Alabama, people know the people. And there's people, and I don't know this chiropractor, Brian Mann, for anything, but, the people on a potential jury did, the judge did, the investigators did, and they certainly were determined to use the evidence, no matter how they got it, to pursue justice.
Well, John, listen to this. So the defense didn't call any witnesses, even though they originally planned to call 7. Now, Chad Morgan, this defense attorney, he said, well, they felt that the state's case had not proven attempted murder, that, again, there was no overt act. So they decided to not call witnesses. And Morgan now seems to say that might have been a mistake. Quote, team decision. Brian was involved in that. He's the one who makes the call on all that mostly. We put together something at lunch yesterday, just trying to figure out what we need to do, and decided to make that call. And obviously, it wasn't the right call. What do you make of that?
It's why judges, before the end of every trial, and particularly at the defense case, are you happy with your attorney? Have you been able to give input in your attorney? Because the next motion that comes after something like this, particularly when the defense attorney is like, oops, is the ineffective assistance of counsel motion. And there's some aspects of trial law, criminal or civil, that's gambling, right? You're taking some chances. I think calling no witnesses is giving the House, the prosecution, all of the advantage, and was a fatal error here.
And by the way, at trial, Hannah testified. She testified about taking the pills, getting sick, Brian supplying them to her, thinking they were just, benign vitamins. And it was her mother who had urged her to go to the hospital because apparently Mann didn't want her to go. And she had been experiencing back pain and abdominal pain and nausea, difficulty walking, lethargic. This was since summer 2021 she was taking these pills. And how even though she's still fighting the effects of lead toxicity, she actually testified and said that she forgives Brian. I've forgiven him, and I just wish that he could change someday to change his ways, for his family and children. That's incredible. That's remarkable.
It is remarkable. And again, growing up in Alabama, there's just something sweet tea, something sweet tea about Alabama. We try to forgive everybody. I now live in Florida and I'm not quite as forgiving as I used to be, but try. But it is stunning and shows, and I think it worked into sentencing too. Here you have somebody that's forgiven him, somebody that just went along. And that made what Brian Mann did, more malicious.
Right. And just finishing this up with the sentencing, the words from the judge, that is clearly somebody who's not forgiven him for what he did. He was so bothered by the facts of this case and so bothered by Brian Mann smirking or snickering during closings that he's like, when parole comes up, let me know. I'm going to drive over there and I'm going to testify against him. I've never heard a judge say that.
It's not common because invariably there's appeals and there's times that a case comes back to a judge. We had it with Joe Exotic. So Joe Exotic's judge at sentencing took some shots at him and his lifestyle. And, invariably, we needed the judge to modify the sentence. And we sought to recuse him because he had taken this shot and he, as a federal judge, chose not to recuse himself. But judges tend to hold that stuff back because it only works against them later. There's just no need for it. But here, that judge wanted to send a clear message of why he did what he did and why he sentenced how he sentenced.
John Phillips, thank you so much. Appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And that is all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.